I recently played through Uncharted 4 and I put a video up on the channel sharing my thoughts. You should go check it out when you're done with this one because it is a brilliant game that I'd recommend to absolutely anyone. Something, however, that has always really interested me about the Uncharted series of games is that they always find a way to tie in a real explorer or adventurer from hundreds of years ago, and they create these fantasized versions of what treasure these people had. For example, in the first game, you've got Nathan Drake hunting down treasure after digging up Sir Francis Drake's coffin. Sir Francis Drake being a real historical figure, he was an English naval officer who died in the late 16th century. The game, however, adapted his legacy to make an unrealistic treasure hunt. The second game's, I guess you could say, historical figure was Marco Polo. Marco Polo was a Venetian, Venetian from Vietnam, Venetian merchant, explorer and writer who travelled through Asia along the Silk Road between 1271 and 1295, who died in 1324. The third game, I'm pretty sure, would have been about Francis Drake again. I've looked up the plot and it's a little unclear, so correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure it starts out with Drake selling his ring, which is from Francis Drake, but like I say, I could be wrong. Finally, Uncharted 4's main historical figure is a pirate called Henry Avery. He was English and lived from 1659 to 1699, so only 40 years. See, the history of the Uncharted games has always interested me because obviously the first few games touch on things like magic and strange creatures, so obviously that's make-believe. But the historical figures obviously existed, and the treasure relating to them also existed in some form. In Uncharted 4, you spend the game searching for Henry Avery's treasure. This Uncharted game is the most realistic one out of the four. It's about as realistic as an action-adventure game where you can scale practically any building can be. But the whole time I was playing through it, I was thinking to myself, there has to be some truth to Avery's fortune and the pirate haven Libertalia. Because in the past, the developers of the Uncharted series haven't just pulled stuff from thin air. There has always been some sort of loose historical background. Like I said, Henry Avery, sometimes called Henry Avery, was a real pirate, but his role in Uncharted 4 is not really accurate at all. But he was famous for a reason, and I'm kind of excited to tell you about his life as a pirate because it's super interesting. He had some official roles in England before properly committing to a life of piracy, so he had some credibility and he had some men working for him on his ship. His piratical career began at the southeast corner of a small island called Mayo, part of Cape Verde's Sotavento Islands. His first real recorded act of piracy was when he robbed 3 English merchantmen from Barbados who dealt in provisions and supplies. 9 of the men from these merchants' ships were quickly persuaded to join Avery's crew because they were afraid to die at the hands of pirates. Avery's crew now numbered about 94 men, making them an extremely powerful enemy to anyone. Avery then sailed to the Guinea coast where he tricked a local chieftain into boarding Fancy. Fancy was the name of Avery's ship. It was formerly called the Charles II, and he tricked this local chieftain into boarding by convincing him they could trade. But Avery, being a pirate, had other ideas and forcibly took his and his men's wealth, leaving them with basically nothing. Then Avery and his crew continued to sail across the African coastline. Avery then stopped at Bioko, Bioko, a small island off the west coast of Africa where Fancy was careened and received. Careened and received is essentially Old English pirate talk for tricking out your sick ship to make everyone else jealous that you have the cooler pirate boat. Look it up in the dictionary, you will get that exact definition, word for word, for both of those two words. You can't convince me otherwise. I'd like to see you try. Part of pimping Avery's ride was cutting away some of the superstructure. The superstructure is a part of a ship that I don't really understand, but from what I've gathered, removing part of it can speed up your boat, and the point of removing the superstructure was to make it easier to travel across the sea. Improving the ship's speed made Fancy one of the fastest vessels sailing in the Atlantic Ocean at the time, which is pretty cool. He called it Fancy for a reason, and that reason probably wasn't because it was legitimately fancy, but hey, I guess that worked out well for Avery. In October 1694, I almost said 1964, which is a very different time period, Fancy captured 2 Danish privateers near the island of Principe. stripping the ships of ivory and gold, and they welcomed around 17 Danish ship members aboard. They joined Avery's crew because, let's be real, they probably didn't have much of a choice, did they? In early 1695, Avery and his men attacked another ship again, capturing a passing French pirate ship, looting the vessel and recruiting 40 of the crew to join their own company. Avery's total strength was now about 150 men, basically meaning he would have been one of the most well-armed pirates in the world at this point in time, which was extremely impressive. Now, none of this ties into Uncharted 4, but it's good to know what kind of a man Avery was. He was a pirate, and a pretty merciless one at that. And this was the start of his piratical career. Just a quick side note, isn't the word piratical cool? Piratical? The definition of the word is one who commits or practices piracy at sea. But it's a new word to me, and I like it. Also, it's weird to just be throwing around the word piracy when it's not referring to streaming a movie on a dodgy site or downloading a game for your computer without paying for it. Like, actually calling looting and stealing piracy in 2020 feels weird, because the concept is the same, where you are stealing something, but it's essentially lost its original sort of value as being a much worse thing. That isn't me saying piracy is okay today though. Uncharted 4 does essentially mainly focus on finding Avery's treasure, and one of Avery's biggest scores might have been where the developers over at Naughty Dog got their inspiration from. It also shows Avery operating in allegiance with some of the other pirates that are mentioned in the game, but for now I'll tell you about this raid and I'll touch on the other pirates and the pirate haven island Libertalia after. In 1695, with his crew's help, Avery set sail for the volcanic island of Perim, P-E-R-I-M, to wait for an Indian fleet that would be passing soon. The fleet was easily the richest prize in Asia, possibly even the entire world at this point in history, and any pirates who could possibly manage to capture it would have been the men responsible for pulling the world's most profitable pirate raid in history, achieving legendary status. In August 1695, Fancy Avery's ship reached the Straits of Bab el-Mandeb, located between Yemen and a part of Africa. And this is where Avery joined forces with other pirate captains, Thomas II, who if you've played Uncharted 4 you will recognise Thomas II. He was also known as the Rhode Island Pirate. He was a 17th century English privateer turned pirate. His ship was called the Sloop of War Amity, and his crew was about 60 men of size. Joseph Farrow on his ship Portsmouth Adventure with 60 men also joined forces. Alongside them was Richard Want on his ship Dolphin, also with 60 men. Alongside them again, William Mays on Pearl with 30 or 40 men, and finally Thomas Wake on Susanna with a pretty big fleet of 70 men. Avery was elected admiral of the new 6-ship pirate flotilla. A flotilla is a small group of warships, despite the fact that Thomas II had arguably more experience, and now Avery somehow found himself in command of over 440 men while they waited for the extraordinary Indian fleet. A convoy of 25 Grand Mughal ships, including the enormous 1,600-ton, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this, Gangi with 80 cannons on it, and its escort, the 600-ton Fateh Muhammad ship. They were spotted passing the straits on their way to Surat, an Indian city. Although the convoy had managed to pass the pirate fleet during the night, the pirates gave chase. The pirates caught up with Fateh Muhammad 4 or 5 days later, which is a long time to be chasing another ship. More than likely intimidated by Fancy's 46 guns or potentially weakened by an earlier battle with Thomas II, Fateh Muhammad's crew put up very little resistance. Henry Avery's pirates then sacked the ship, which had belonged to Abdul Ghaffar, reportedly Surat's wealthiest merchant, making this a very, very lucrative attack for the pirates. While Fateh Muhammad's treasure of some 50,000 to 60,000 pounds was enough to buy Fancy 50 times over, once the treasure was shared out among the pirate fleet, Avery's crew received only small shares. Now, whenever I was researching for this video, it said between 50,000 pounds and 60,000 pounds, but it doesn't say if that is adjusted for inflation, because 50k back in 1695 money is a staggering £10,450,650 in 2020 money. Doesn't matter if there were still 250 men alive at this point, they weren't doing that bad splitting it up. But this attack wasn't over yet. Avery now sailed in pursuit of the second Mughal ship, Gangi, the name meaning exceeding treasure, which makes me believe there was a bit of a fortune on that ship. They were able to overtake it a few days after the attack on Fateh Mohammed, with the ships Amity and Dolphin left behind. Thomas too had died at this point, and only Fancy, Pearl and Portsmouth Adventure were present for the actual battle. I mean, the fact 3 ships in this fleet were still going days into this is pretty impressive, considering the amount of fighting that was going on. Like I said, Thomas too allegedly died at the hands of their enemies, and they can't have been able to get a lot of rest over the course of these days. You wouldn't be able to rest with everything that was going on. Gangi Isawai, the targeted ship, was captained by Muhammad Ibrahim. This ship was a fearsome opponent, mounting 80 guns and a musket-armed guard of 400. Avery was able to hit Gangi Isawai in the main mast with a lucky shot from one of Fancy's cannons. With Gangi Isawai unable to escape, Fancy pulled up alongside it. For just a short moment, a heavy amount of Indian musket fire prevented the pirates from jumping ship and taking over, but one of Gangi Isawai's powerful cannons exploded. This was what ruined the Indians' chance at victory, because the cannon exploding instantly killed many and demoralized the Indian crew completely. They ran below deck, cowering for safety, and some of them fought to put out the spreading fires that came from said explosion. Avery's men took advantage of all the panicking and confusion, quickly scaling Gangi Isawai's steep sides. The crew of Pearl, initially fearful of attacking Gangi Isawai, now felt confident and joined Avery's crew on the Indian ship's deck. A ferocious hand-to-hand battle then followed, which lasted 2 to 3 hours. After several hours of stubborn but leaderless resistance, the ship surrendered. In his defense, Captain Ibrahim would later report that many of the enemy were sent to hell. Basically him saying a lot of the enemies died. Avery's outnumbered crew may have suffered up to over 100 casualties, although these figures are uncertain. The pirates were then able to find out from the prisoners on the ship that the treasure was kept in the ship's holds. This is where I believe the Uncharted 4 developers got Henry Avery's treasure from. Anything else in the game seems to be fictional, but it would make sense that this is where he acquired his fortune. A place in the game that is somewhere that is almost definitely not real is Libertalia, a pirate haven island. Libertalia was a legendary free colony founded by pirates and the pirate captain Misson. Although most historians have expressed doubts over its existence outside of literature, Libertalia got its name from the Latin word liberi, which means free. Misson's idea was to have his society be a society in which people of all colours, creeds and beliefs were allowed to live their lives and be free of any scrutiny. He wanted to give the people of Libertalia their own identity, not one of a past country of origin. The pirates of this time were against all various forms of government of their day, monarchies, slavery and capitalist societies. The pirates practiced forms of direct democracy, where the people as a whole held the authority to make laws and rules, and used systems of councils with delegates who were supposed to think of themselves as comrades of the general population and not rulers. The pirate utopia's motto was "For God and Liberty." I would love for this place to have existed because it sounds so free and fascinating, but sadly historians can't prove it to be any more than fiction, so that's what I will believe it is. In Uncharted 4, Nate and Sam find Avery's treasure on this island, which obviously isn't real. I really enjoyed taking a deeper look into Henry Avery and Libertalia, also known as Libertalia, after playing through Uncharted 4. Doing the research for today's video was really cool, getting insight into how pirates operated back in the 17th century and where Naughty Dog pulled inspiration from when they were coming up with the plot of the 4th Uncharted game. Henry Avery was an incredibly interesting man who led an exciting life back when the world was a very different place. Maybe I'll take a deep dive into Sir Francis Drake's history or Marco Polo's life in a future video to see where those Uncharted installments pulled inspiration from. Of course, there was more to Henry Avery's life, like the fact he went by other names Jack Avery or John Avery and had the nickname Benjamin Bridgman, but to his associates and crewmates, he was also known as Long Ben. That's it for today's video though. Like I said, I might take a look back into the real history behind Uncharted 1 through 3's adventures, because it can be really fun to check these kind of things out. I hope you learned something interesting today, because I certainly did when researching the video's topic. If you did enjoy today's pirate-filled video, please consider hitting the like button as it really helps out the channel. And if you really enjoyed, why not subscribe? It only takes a second, and if you ring the notification bell, you can easily see when I upload future videos. It really helps me get discovered by more people. If you want to stay up to date with the channel, you can find me over on Twitter at AnthonyJGaming. I'm pretty active over there, so say hi. I'm also on the PlayStation Network as AnthonyJGaming again, so feel free to add me. And finally, I'm on Instagram as AnthonyJosephGaming. That's it for today's video. Thank you again so much for watching. Bye.